Awesome, and we're live. Welcome everybody to another edition of the NPM Open RFC call. Thank you all for joining. Today's date is Wednesday, September 23rd. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue number 237 of the RFC's repo. And I'll paste that as well in chat. Just a quick reminder, all calls, NPM RFC calls, and all discussions on the threads are covered under a code of conduct, which is found on the RFC's README. And we'll make sure to link that actually in the meeting notes just after this. And again, these calls are meant to be a channel and an opportunity for folks in the community and for ourselves, the NPM, primarily the NPM CLI team, to come and connect and ideally move forward features and you know, the initiatives that we want to see build and grow the community and the CLI itself. So wanted to give the floor for any folks that had any announcements. Roy, I think you might have one from yesterday.
Yeah, we have another pre-release of the beta version. Make sure to give it a try if you haven't yet.
Yeah, so if you're not following along, we've been posting on our blog. Every Tuesday, you'll see an announcement, blog posts go out. So that's blog.npmjs.com. Also, if you follow on Twitter, you'll get notices when we're doing releases. So yeah, we'll continue to be shipping weekly releases of beta and then RC release candidates of NPM 7. So love the feedback we've been getting, and feel free to continue to file issues and bugs as you find them against the CLI repo. So awesome. Did anybody else have any other announcements they want to give? If not, we'll move on to the agenda. The first item we actually had on here was PR number 235. So Mark, I think this was related to allowing the essentially customized or configurable header values to be passed through to the registry. Did you want to speak to this updated RFC?
Sure. Yeah. So like you say, this is sort of going above and beyond the other RFC that's we're going to talk about later on. So this is I may be getting this wrong, so I'm hoping somebody can correct me if I am wrong. But this is basically for a server side to populate the content of any missing header information that might be needed. So like I say, this came about from the previous discussion of sending the header information as part of the HTTP header requests. I think in a nutshell, the idea being if you wanted to create any authentication tokens or any identification that if there's anything missing from when the server retrieves the requests, the server itself can generate whatever is required based on that server that can be passed back, and then the content can then be saved into the .rpm RC content for future use, basically.
So in the implementation,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there were in the RFC there were sort of a couple of questions I actually added onto that. Like I say, it wasn't my idea, this RFC; it came along from my RFC. So yeah, there's a couple of questions that I actually added within this RFC, a couple of potential anomalies or security issues.
And again, you're speaking to the 235?
I am, yes, sorry. Yeah.
And I'll just link that for folks. The one thing I'll note on the actual implementation side of the headers, like the ini spec, is that how you define usually nested or arrays in the ini spec? I think it's usually that the key would take up, so like npm app ID would actually be the key inside of the headers. Like
yeah, I was gonna do it. I was going to do it that way, but this was the example that came from Isaac's on the other PR. So I thought this was maybe a suggested way of doing it, which is why I kept it in that order. So yeah, I can change it to a typical array style one.
Yeah, we can discuss it like in further, like in terms of that actual design, but I think it is supposed to be like a typical array fashion.
Yeah.
I think that's how all other ini files work. So just so it's like, easy to parse.
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense. It seemed a bit odd this way, but yeah, I can change that, no problem.
Yeah, did anybody else have any thoughts on this? I haven't had a chance to read through exactly what you've updated here, but like in terms of the actual implementation, that looks exactly what we discussed last time. So.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but by reading this, I really think it's just like a set cookie response header from the server getting like saved by the browser, right? It's pretty much that same analogy.
Pretty much, yeah, I guess, yeah. So so maybe just to take it forward, the only thing that I wasn't quite clear on was with whether the server can generate any information that it sort of wants to. It seemed that might have some security implications, so I didn't quite think it through fully, which is why I've gone the route with the client still has to sort of ask what headers it wants filling in, where then I've just got like a sort of a hard-coded npm generate token. So that's basically saying what the server needs to replace, essentially, is the way I went at the moment. Otherwise, I was wondering whether the server could just start adding anything to the headers, and then that's saved into the npm RC file, and potential security issues there.
Awesome. I think Wes just noted the way it works. Yeah. The way any support spec works. So
I'm pretty sure it is correct. And, Isaac is the author of that. So I'm guessing that the example would be correct according to that package's parsing. So, but the point is that it's not and I mistyped it. So, but it's not an array of key value pairs. It's an array of strings. And so that's why he's doing the key value.
I see exactly what. Yes. Okay. That does make sense. So headers is a single value that essentially, this essentially gets appended to. Okay. Interesting.
So, hi, I had a quick clarification question. So the intention here is for a server to be able to, like you said, Roy, like set a cookie on an individual package so that the client sends that information in further requests. Is that right? The other RFC was one that said that if the package on disk or the package JSON on disk has like, what was the conclusion from the other one? Like, how does
the conclusion for the other one was to use the config instead. So that's where the config piece comes in, right?
So what were the reasons to choose the config instead of reifying it in like if it's meant to be per package and it comes from the server, why does the server has already decided what information to send down? The server already controls the information that gets put into node modules. So why does it need some extra complication when the server can just put it in there before it sends it down?
So I think in this case, this would be information that could potentially be passed through the registry and then back to your project on subsequent installs. I think that was the primary use case for it. And if you don't pass this through your registry, could potentially be passing back headers that it expects, or like it thinks you need, like an app ID. So it could potentially automatically generate that for you, and then that could be saved back to the config.
Right. I guess so. If I have already configured an app ID, then great. My npm install tells my registry who I am. And at that point, it should have enough information to customize the node modules payload however it wants. And similarly, since that app ID is already configured, it shouldn't, I don't know what extra information it would not, like, any extra information it already has because it was able to send them down in the first place. So if I've configured the app ID, I don't see the point in adding additional metadata. If I have not configured it, then the server has to be able to figure out who I am from stuff that's already sent anyway, in which case we're in the same scenario where the server already knows this information and knows I need it. So I'm having trouble understanding what the point is of telling the client to tell the server this extra information when it already knows it.
Did you have something to add there, Roy?
Well, I think the goal is to be able to, for these RFCs specifically, it is to be able, like the server gives you a random ID, right? And you put that in your npm RFC, and next time you reach out to the server, it's going to recognize you're coming back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similar as a cookie, right? Like same
Yes.
as any cookie. No?
But that, okay, so then maybe that's my confusion. This new RFC is not attempting to attach information to a specific package. It's essentially you're asking, this RFC is asking for the server to be able to set my app ID on the initial response.
Right. Yes. Or any, I think it's any header, right, Mark?
Yeah, I think the idea was it's adding on to the sort of generic HTTP header. So I think Wes that came up with another possibility was for the some kind of authentication tooling that you might have. So that could be generated at the server end rather than having to configure it at the front end and get your tokens and so on and then append it to the npm RC. It could be a request and it's automatically done for you through that third-party tool.
Then that leads, thank you, that clears it up a lot, and that leads to my next question, which is what happens if the server wants to set a field that I've already put in my npm RC? Who is in charge of my local npm config, myself or the server?
So if it's already defined, I don't see that stipulation in the RFC, which is a good point.
Yeah, it is.
And then the second question is, if that's true, which is what I would expect, that the server can't override my local value, then that means that anything the server sets here is a set once, never touch again thing. So why would they want to do that? Like, other than an app ID, like even a login token, you wouldn't want to do that because those need to be refreshed occasionally. So other than an app ID, what information would you possibly want to set once and never again from the server?
That's why it's arbitrary. Like there's open for. Go ahead.
Well, right. Like, I hear this generic, but I'm asking for, like, other than the app ID, are there any use cases?
Yeah, use cases and examples. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say the server would keep whatever state that is mutable, right? So it would again, it could just boil back down to the app ID in those cases, I think, if you wanted to use that feature. Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm asking is when is what you just described, Wesley, not the only thing you'd ever want to do?
So I think for this feature, so the new RFC seems to me that is probably the only thing you'd ever want to do. The old RFC was to provide sort of a lower level thing for a bunch of other types of features you may want to build on top, this being one of them. And this one just makes the most sense with just the app ID. The other ones I was thinking about were, I think the authentication one is one that is fairly clear to me, and it's not a set once and never update. It's it might be like authentication mechanism settings, what your your server should auth against. Like, I know we have a couple of different methodologies at Netflix that we use for different types of auth. So if the package was saying, I haven't fully thought through some of these, so.
Well, and that all makes sense, but like 2 years from now, when the infra team wants to change the authentication method, what was the benefit of automatically putting it on all your employees' machines if you then have to go ask them all to change it manually next time?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking also it would be valuable to take like build metadata and throw it in there so that we could then report that back to the server on every install. So you could have, an npm RC in the root of the Jenkins instance that says like, I'm, this is my instance ID, and then any npm install in that box would then send that along. So that's sort of the underlying feature could be used in a bunch of interesting ways like that.
The ability to send headers, of course, that, I mean,
Right.
I think that's established. I'm basically asking the ability for the server to install headers on the client. Other than like initially generating an app ID, that's the only thing I can think of where it would even be not terrible for the server to do it.
Yeah,
So
I think that's
so
the
I'm
one
sort of
case.
asking, like, if we can't come up with any other thing where it
Well-
wouldn't be hugely problematic, then maybe we should limit this to only the app ID, or maybe we should come up with an alternative approach.
Sure. That might be one of the alternatives. I guess to these RFC specifically, maybe just narrowing the scope. But that said, I do remember chatting with Wes and Will back in the last conference, and they were sharing me some interesting use cases, specifically from Netflix. Nothing, I think it's nothing to. But basically, they were trying out the cool stuff with like dividing your install tree for a given project, like into subtrees, basically within a single npm install, right? That could possibly be optimized for repeating users, right? So I guess one of the things they could try to identify these subtrees with, let's say, a hash, and put that on the clients, and then any further npm install like would send out that same hash as long as there's no change in the install tree, right? And try
Right,
to
but if there's a
optimize.
change in the install tree, it needs to be changed. And so what I'm saying is the choice to put it in the config eliminates every one of those interesting use cases, because they all require the server to be able to update it more than once.
Right.
So the fact that it's in config means I believe that the only thing it will forever be useful for is the app ID initially generating one in the first place. And
Sure.
I'm trying not to make such a strong statement, because I'm trying to instead ask, does anyone actually have a use case where setting it once and literally never changing it again ever is viable? And so far, no one has come up with one. They've only come up with like you and Wesley have mentioned a bunch of really great use cases for where the server can update it over time. But it would be really bad if the server updated my config over time and overrode a value I'd put in it. So I don't think that this RFC is going to solve any of those use cases. And this RFC seems like delightfully generic, but if there do not exist any generic use cases, then perhaps it shouldn't be generic.
Sure.
Mark, did you have any other, when you were drafting this and when we initially brought in the scope beyond the app ID, like do you remember, like, is this piece as well super important for your team? Or is the more important aspect just like sending the header?
No, I mean, to be honest, I don't even think we'd probably make use of the auto-generated app ID for the reasons just mentioned. This was just, like I say, this wasn't really our team's intention. This was just, as we were talking about the other RFC, it sounded like, I think last week's discussion, it was potentially another good idea on top of the other proposal.
Okay. And maybe we can bundle in then with that, because I thought did you update the original RFC then too?
I did, yes. That is in the agenda for a bit later. We can jump onto that next, maybe.
Yeah, we can pull that up actually. So that was number 138.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll pull that up because they're related here.
Just to round off that little bit of the discussion, just to make sure we're all clear. Actually, the ideas that Rui and I were talking about before with the like specialized install infrastructure and stuff can all be done with just an app ID probably. So like really, I think if that's really where we're going with this, I say we look really heavily and invest in the first RFC, because anybody could build tooling on top of that out of band from npm, and if their tooling wants to generate some specific hash and put it into a config, then that's on them, right? And that would be, if I went down that road in the future in my use cases, I'm going to be writing a tool that does this stuff anyway, like, and I would just bundle that feature into my tool, because I need to wrap multiple package managers and a bunch of other features into one cohesive product, which this feature really wouldn't be built. It wouldn't be something I would build on top of either. The underlying one, the headers one, is where I would, build on top of. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Should I close that RFC then, the new one?
I'm thinking that it might be tough to get like
Well,
unless we can leave it open unless
yeah.
See if somebody else has some new additions to it.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't close it.
but
We
close.
just narrow it down to the app ID if that's the consensus.
Well, but is that even necessary? Like what we're doing is providing a convenience mechanism for that. So specifically doing that much work, is that worth it versus just asking, like being able to generate this for whoever? Like it seems very specific then in that case, which is why I think we broadened the scope of it, right?
Well, I think there's still value, right? Like you still want to be able to the register to send that info and be able to just recognize that user later on, right? Without having each user do that manually, right? You can just have the server send a header, it gets put in the config, and later on, every npm install is going to have that app ID.
So, okay, then I would want to look at the naming of it a little bit more,
Sure.
like app ID versus anything else, right? Yeah, so I think that we leave it open for now, as Roy mentioned, and potentially, Mark, if you want, I don't think you have to really update this. We can see if there's folks that actually can bring up some other use cases beyond just setting an app ID, to Jordan's point, and then we can see if we want to move forward with this or scope it back to just something that's very specific.
Well, and to be clear, if the server sent headers can be stored somewhere other than the user's config, even if that's merged with the user's config in some way, right? But like that there's no chance that the server can actually override what I've put in my config, then that actually unlocks all of the use cases that Wesley and Roy have mentioned, because it's safe for the server to update it over time, and that can always be allowed. And at that point, the generic mechanism makes sense to me, but I haven't thought about that to know what it would look like.
Yeah, it'd be a separate file.
Yeah, I think Jordan, if you can also leave these mentions in the RFC, so that later on when we catch up with the discussion, we also have the documentation there.
I'll try and do that.
Thank you.
Awesome. So did we want to look at the updates then to the RFC 138?
138.
Yeah. And did you want to give a quick synopsis, I guess, Mark, of the updates you made?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there wasn't an awful lot of changes really, other than previously it was making use of the package.json to store the header information that will be sent in the HTTP header requests. It was asked to make that change to the npm RC file. That could be either the global npm RC or project local npm RC file as well. That's pretty much it, really, other than the title change as well. As asked to make that a bit more generic, the title.
So I'm just taking notes here as well. Did anybody have any thoughts on this or any other feedback? If you've had a chance to look at it, Christian?
I am not sure. This just came to the top of my head, so I'm not sure if this is a valid point. What I'm thinking is, like, do you always want to have a field in package.json, or might there be use cases where you just would want to have something like -- headers, and it would only be sent once, or only if you run a certain script or whatever?
So for our particular use case, it's really for the npm audit. So we only really need it specified for an npm audit itself, the app ID in particular. So yeah, so it doesn't really need to go with every request, but through
that runs on install too, though, no?
Well, sorry, yes, it'll be as part of the install as well. I'll do the audit as well. Yeah.
And again, it wouldn't be, I don't think as the RFC is being updated, it wouldn't be a part of package JSON. It'd be just a npm RC.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, that was the last thing that was asked to be changed. Was
Oh yeah, sorry. I don't know, the kind of point that I'm making or trying to make is actually we use Nexus repository at work, and I could see some kind of functionality where we would be able to like move something that is tagged into a specific folder within the Nexus repository to get rid of them at some point, because they're like snapshots. So, but this would probably be something that we would be doing through the command line and not through npm RC configuration.
Yeah, so you should be able to set them via through like the command line for sure. I think we had an example of that in the
Can we make sure that we have examples in there of command line, environment variable, and npm RC?
Yeah, there is there. Line 44
Awesome. Thank you.
specifies a -- headers that you can enter there as well.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's line 44. Yeah, so additional configuration. Yeah, I think this these updates reflect everything we chatted about in the last call for sure. I'm personally that, you know, in favor of sort of how it's spec'd out. Need to read the language for sure, and yeah. Did anybody have any reservations about this or thoughts? If not, we can move on and just ask folks to add comments over the next week or so. But I think if this comes up again next week, we probably can ratify it if there's no pushback. And yeah, and it's definitely something that's pretty, I think, pretty easy to support. Mark, I'm not sure if you and your team actually have time to contribute back actual code, but this is a potential opportunity for sure to land.
Yeah, I can.
Once we spec
I can try and take a look at that. Yeah, we have improvement days every 2 weeks, so I can try and make that part of my improvement day.
That would be awesome. Cool. Moving on to PR number 232, npm audit for a not yet installed package. So Christian, this is your PR. Did you want to give a quick update?
Yeah, this is basically just an RFC coming from the issue that we discussed last week. So the idea is to add npm audit information to npm view. Roy did actually mention that this should be opt out so that you always get the information. I honestly don't have any opinions on that. So if anyone has any opinions on that, please share them.
Or did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, so basically, is that just in my point of view, the choice we have today in the CLI, it is to do the audit when installing, right? So I would expect that to be the default behavior also when reaching out for view, because it's kind of like I want to just basically fetch all the information for that package, right? So if there are known vulnerabilities, I think it's desirable that we let you know right away, right? And I think that's the default behavior for the install. So would be special, I think, to not do that by default.
I mean, the point of view though is to view the package. Audit information is not in it. So I actually think it would be weird to have npm view do it.
Right, from the point of view.
And also npm view is primarily JSON data. Yes, it's not defaulting to showing that, but you can do npm view package dependencies, and it shows you the dependencies field of the JSON, right? Like that's just the way that command works, with or without the -- JSON. So if you're going to include audit data, it would have to be included in the JSON in some form, which I don't think there is a canonical form for that anywhere yet. I'm sure the CLI uses one, but like there's not one that users ever see. And then separately, like I run this command all the time, so it was definitely not worth slowing it down for me to ever see an audit warning.
Yeah.
And but like, yeah, I think install is doing a bunch of things, and like I would rather type like npm audit foo and or foo specifier and get the audit report for that personally.
So you're saying if the audit data was in the document already, then this would be totally fine, because obviously you're not.
Well, then it would just flow through and work, but the audit data is not static, so that obviously can't work unless updating documents is easy, in which case I want to update readmes without publishing.
Well, we do update maintainers. Those are mutable. That is mutable data. There is mutable data in the document, right? So there is a precedent for having, let's say.
Yeah, and if you want to add it in there, that's fine, because then it's not computing it on every call. It's pre-computing it, and it's just part of the JSON, right? But
sure, but that would be a much larger change on the registry side, though.
And it would also increase all document sizes, right? So like, that's another thing that we need to be mindful of.
So the thing is that I think Jordan has a very special view, in which even I, before joining the team, I never saw commands such as npm view as like the direct connection, right, to document, etc. Right? I do see it from the point of a user view point of view. I'm just like, I think it also has an npm show alias to it. So I just wanted to show up information. I don't think about the relationship of the internals. Like I'm just looking up the document for that package. I just think of the terms of user point of view, right? Show me what this package is all about, right? Like then it is going to show up dependencies, like current.
I mean, the things version. Just to be clear, the things I use it most often for is I should use it with time or with versions, because I want to know when a version was published or what versions are available. When a version is published is how I figure out, did a publish of a package break me, and what date can I install -- before to get it working again. Like. So it's for stuff that's not actually in the package JSON, it's in the document.
Yeah. But that said, if you're already using options, you're already customizing your npm view workflow, you can also just add no audit, right? Like in your specific use case there, it's just another flag you can set.
But if I want to do it for all of the npm views, then I have to use the environment variable, which disables it for all installs, because there's no way to, because the config flags across npm subcommands have the same name, and there's no way to configure a config flag for just one or subset of subcommands. That actually creates a huge usability issue.
Yeah, I've had that in the back of my mind and backlog for a long time, what you're talking to. And we need an RFC for configuring at the command line, right?
Yeah, the turning save on by default messed with our shrink wrap scripts at Airbnb a couple of years ago for the same reason. So like that's a separate problem that'd be great to solve. But until that's solved, I think we should all be very careful about adding a existing config flag to a new subcommand.
I see the concern. Yeah.
So if we were able to resolve that, though, is that in general where we want this information to live? I think that's what Roy was getting to.
Right.
If we could resolve, let's say, the performance, because you're concerned if we can resolve any performance degradation, and let's say potential hazards with flags, then the proper place to view, let's say, audit information for a package could be in npm view, or where else would we want it to?
So here's my concern there. My point that I see of this PR is stop before I install. Stop me. I want you to stop me before I install. Right? Like, and if we put it in view, then we have to go tell everybody, you cannot run npm install. You have to run npm view and npm install every time. Otherwise, you are not getting the benefit that I would hope to see, right? Which is don't pull down anything other than the Pecument if I decide that something in this tree is going to be something I don't want on my machine. And I don't think that really solves any problems other than making it easier for people to see more granular audit details, which I think is a different use case, but also and valuable. But I don't think it solves the one that, to me, is what's presented by the text of this RFC.
Like
Right?
you don't understand the full scope of an impact until you finally install. And I apologize, Christian, you have your hand up. Feel free to chime in.
So I do feel you, Wes. I think this is, I don't know, this is definitely also an issue at some point that needs to be tackled. However, I'm just trying to address the information bottleneck that is there at the moment, the information gap, because you don't even, there's no way for you to even know what's going to happen unless you install. However, I just wanted to bring that up. How popular is npm view? Because like, if I'm used to using npm audit, then I would probably expect the npm audit for a package to live there, right? Would I be even aware that npm view exists, and would I find the, or would I go there and try to figure that out? Because like, is there any logical connection for someone who's just trying to, who's used to using npm audit? That's kind of the concern that I'm wanting to raise a bit.
Sure. Mark, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want to chime in, Anna?
I think it was kind of similar to what Christian was saying. For me, from a user, it seems a bit odd to get audit information to do the view command. It just seemed a bit, a bit of an odd step to be taking. And yeah, I think people might not notice that that's additional information you now get.
Sure.
But I understand, I think from last week's conversation, that the audit can't be done, because I think that will fetch everything down already. So it's kind of a bit late at that point. I think that was the reasoning last week on the discussion.
Yeah, so like specifically this whole RC is for something you don't have already, right? So it's something that we have to go fetch, right?
Yeah, so but wasn't the discussion last week that the npm audit will actually already have fetched it to be able to get its child dependencies and so on. So it's a bit late at that point, which is, I think, why it went to the npm view discussion.
Yeah, like if we look at the docs for that.
Yeah, maybe to talk a little bit, I think the implementation, the way we discussed it before, I think it would look more like an extra lookup to the audit endpoint, that specific package, so that it will retrieve all the info.
Like npm audit would take a net new argument, which would be the package. So it'd either be fix, which we'd have to be mindful since fix is not a flag. Fix is actually like a command. Then essentially npm audit would be able to take an actual package name and go and fetch that. So it wouldn't be, it'd go and fetch the advisors against that specific package. I don't think we could, and I don't think it would make sense to change like that.
So I think there's two use cases here we're sort of mixing together, and one is better surfacing of audit things in other workflows. Like I want to do a separate workflow that lets me look at something before I take the action to install. And then there's the I'm installing. I ran a command that should install, but somehow we should determine before we pull the package down that actually maybe we should warn them and say, you're about to install something that has a known vulnerability in the version you would be getting. because you specified, at 1.0 and there's a 2.0 that fixes that. Like, we should do that and surface it before we unpack it. Right. And that's the other case. And I thought that was what this was specifically trying to talk to, which sounds to me like there's just two RFCs here.
Yeah. So to your point, I do think for point number 2, last I heard from Isaac, we were pairing on the new audit stuff for V7. I do think it's coming up a way to just avoid installing. Well, if you do have audit info in your cache already, which NPM 7 now keeps, it keeps a track of audits it already seen in the past. So I do think we want to make sure that anytime you do an NPM install, and we already know that for that specific version of a package, there is a known vulnerability, we try to skip it. We take it into account when building the ideal tree from the first time. So that would be something like useful for tackling the addressing number 2, right? From what you said.
Yeah. Do you have docs on that? I didn't know that it was.
That's like last week stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe I can send you the PR.
Also make some really interesting. That will also introduce some very interesting behaviors if you're trying to debug why you got a certain version, and that's going to be, I think, a very good long-term thing. But I think people, if they don't know that it's doing that, they're going to be very confused as to why the package JSON, the document says you should get a new one, and then for whatever reason, what ends in the tree is not that.
Yeah, no. And I know Isaac wants to write a blog post dedicated just to the new audit mechanism that he built for V7. So that's probably
And then, so would it ever bump you back, or would it only bump you forward? Because that's another big question.
It would,
right?
Yeah, it could bump you back if the previous version don't have any, right? So it could.
Which could be also very problematic, depending on. Well, anyway, there's probably a lot of edge.
That's a separate discussion.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk about number 1 you mentioned. Like it could also be maybe another. Just diverting the idea, but maybe you should surface that info on the website on npmjs.com. Vulnerabilities. Has that been discussed?
So I don't know how you feel about this, but the way I feel about it is that if you put this on the website, then that would be a bit of a blame game. I think that would put a lot of pressure on developers. Some might
it's
say
already
rightfully
there.
so, but I'm not sure if I would imagine there would be pushback to that. Concerning adding it to NPM audit, I think that would also not be what we want, probably, because that would not allow you to limit the output of NPM audit to a locally installed package in a way. So what I'm just thinking now is, what if we had another new command called npm advisory, and it would be totally reasonable that it would always fetch the advisory from the npm registry or npm audit endpoint.
I'd have to think about that a bit more. I kind of want to circle back just to be mindful of time here, because we only have about 13 minutes and we've spent a lot of time on this. I did want to note that this has come, like the initial RFC and the changes that you've made as well, Christian, like based on the conversations we had about this before, do still seem to make sense to me. We've come into this discussion, I think, because of the audit by default on npm view. And I think that there might be another way to look at this, and another, like, one small change we can make to the RFC, which is you added the audit -- audit flag. Maybe we just change that name. It's like with audit or something like that. So it's like adding supplemental information to npm view. So again, we get away from the concept of trying to slow things down or trying to get information, but we start to tack on essentially supplemental metadata to that NPM view output. I think that would maybe change how we're looking at this and slicing this conversation, because it seems like we're kind of going in circles as far as where this should live. I think as an end user, I think it should live in Vue. It's just that that information isn't going to be there by default, and so potentially creating some sort of like flag that tacks on that extra call then is you opting into getting that information.
What's the benefit of adding a flag to npm view versus just extending npm audit so it can take a specifier? Like, why is npm
Because
view
npm audit is
package at
different.
version?
It has completely different functionality, right? Like by default.
You're talking about, well, npm audit is saying to me what npm install is saying. It's, if I don't provide a specifier, it's saying like, tell me the audit warnings for my current project. With install, if I then do provide a specifier, I'm saying go reach out and do the action on that package at version. So if I say npm audit package at version, well, why would that not be intuitively auditing that package version that I indicated?
Because it's not going to install it and then audit all the like depths in its tree, right? So you won't get the
I see, because it's not
scope.
transitive. It's just that one.
It's just the one, right? So it's truly just the information would just be advisories against that package and the spec that is provided to npm view. In the case,
when would you only care about non-transitive advisories? I want to know. The whole point is I want to know, if I install this package, what is npm audit going to complain about? It gives me no value to tell me that the package is safe, but it has 1,000
like a CV,
vulnerable dependencies.
Yeah.
So like that basically would be, yeah. So that increases the scope of how I was looking at this. That completely increases the scope of Christian. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think Isaac actually brought this up and said that it would be more work, but it would be worth it. And I completely agree with that, because I agree with Jordan here. Otherwise, it would be pretty much useless.
I'd like to push back on pretty much useless. I think you both said that it's just not. There are so many times where what's really being reported here is just wrong because it's transitive and we're not doing static analysis to tell whether it actually applies. This is the whole reason why we're talking about letting package authors block the propagation of those being reported. And I think that we could start by not reporting them, which would give people a cleaner set of things, and they'd know, oh yeah, no, I specifically know I'm using this package and I should look to see if this CVE is going to be affecting my usage of it. It's much harder to do when you go and do the whole tree. And so I think there is value in adding this without that, because then I can be, as a package maintainer, very critical of my direct depths in a way that I don't have to go dig through the like noise, which happens today on any given package, right? Because of the transitives.
Yeah, so I would see this, there's potential for like running and executing this in like a temporary directory or something, like doing a full install and getting the audit done, and almost like a dry run, right? Like, so that is the only way I could see, because there's I think a big burden to on the registry side to maintain like it's going to be interesting how we would have to like support this information.
I thought npm 7 already did that. When you install, it prepares like the quick audit warnings based on the log file you send up.
But what we're talking about is not installing by default. This whole concept,
right?
is
but
that
I'm saying
you want to like see. But if you don't have that information yet, then it's. Yeah.
But npm install sends up. Oh, you're saying npm install sends up the lock file.
Yeah, so like if you don't have that information and you have never installed this dep, you don't have any of the advisory information. You don't have anything like about its deps, right? Like, so like what I'm saying here is that we could support this, but it will be you'll basically be doing an install and an audit no matter what to get this support.
I mean, I have a package npm -lock file that does that. It installs your package in a temporary directory and generates a temporary lock file
Yeah.
for the sole purpose of, it doesn't even install the files. It uses lock file only or whatever. And so for the purpose of running an audit in my, I have a package called aud, AUD, for that purpose. And it's
Existence of that package proves that we probably need to make some changes in NPM here, I think.
Yes, fair. Those have been needed for a long time and promised at the time NPM audit was created and never delivered, but that's a separate conversation. What I mean though is that it's actually fast for an unknown package version to just create a lock file only. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal for NPM audit foo@, version to do that and then send that lock file up and have the registry spit out the audit tree for it. And as for Wes's comment, like in general, it would seem useful to have a like, not like a depth command, but like a give me only directs versus give me the whole tree. But that modifier could be applied to NPM audit as well. And then you've achieved all these use cases without asking the question of where it lives, because it's audit stuff. It lives in audit.
Interesting. Okay, I think there's more to expand on here for sure. And we've only got about 5 minutes left. And I know Roy specifically added a few more of these bullet points. Based on this feedback, and I'm gonna write some more notes when I get a chance here, please add comments into the RFC itself. And it sounds like there's some more to talk about here. So moving on to the next item we had, which was add strict peer depths. So the override e-resolve if not true. This was by Isaac, who wasn't able to make the call today. And this was essentially just a shout out to landing this work in Arborist. Roy, did you have more context maybe you could provide?
Well, not sure. Well, I mean, yes, I remember now. Peer dependency change, right? So basically the behavior we had before, when you would npm install --force, and it would try its best to install valid peer dependencies into your project. And basically, it takes, if I remember the algorithm correctly, it just takes the one at the top, the higher up the peer dependency declared as the one that counts. So basically, anyone that has, if you're just using React and within your install tree, you have peer depths in React everywhere. Well, if you declare the top level React, it's going to use that anyway. So that was the behavior for force. That's now the default behavior. And it adds a strict peer depths flag instead to opt in into the old more strict approach of just failing if some peer depth conflicts are found down the tree. That's pretty much the change.
I know, Jordan, you had chimed in on that conversation or on that issue, but didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to
add. Sorry, remind me which one? I was busy.
I can copy and paste here for a second for you.
The less strict behavior of peer dependencies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess and Isaac and I talked about it in Slack, but I mean, to me, like the best feature of NPM 7 was that it was going to fail installs when the graph was invalid. I think that that there are tons, because NPM has never done that, and the vast majority of projects never run NPM LS and CI, for example. That happens a lot, where they end up having things that are supposed to be incompatible, and they just run it and don't realize there's bugs. The counter argument that was given was essentially, well, because there are so many people like who do this wrong, for primarily like, and Isaac wasn't even talking about consumers who definitely do it wrong, but like they can fix it. But talking about package maintainers who may do it wrong, then a lot of users could be affected and won't be able to fix it. And while that is true, if the maintainers are still doing it wrong at this point, in my experience, having yelled at hundreds of maintainers for doing peer depths wrong over the years, they just actually don't know what's right. And as soon as they're told what's right, they fix it. they're not opinionated about the way they're doing it. It's just that peer deps are confusing and hard, and it's really easy to screw them up. Everybody does it. And like, so it's just about evangelism, right? Meaning a problem has to be surfaced in their user base before they can learn how to fix it. By not doing strict peer deps by default in NPM 7, like that won't surface the problem, and people will still continue to have their invalid graphs. And in fact, the auto installing of peer deps, I think, is a bad thing without strict peer deps. You can go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, no, it's just that the counterpoint is that the compromise here is that now we have this big block, like really hard to miss, explaining where the conflict is, right? So instead of that being an error and just ending with code 1, right, and your script fails, it is going to pass. It is going to do its best to actually install all your dependencies, and you're going to have that big block of warning for NPM 7. So the compromise is maybe to try to flip the switch for NPM 8. So that the ecosystem has the time to catch up, right? Like people start seeing these big warning blocks, right, and they start acting on it. So, and I think if at least we have the big players, right, big frameworks, tooling people are using, fixing their problems, then we're going to be comfortable in turning that switch for NPM 8.
If in fact that is a commitment to turning it on in NPM 8, and if the warning message says your install will fail in NPM 8 if this is not fixed, please report it to these packages, right? Something like that. If it's not like scary and tells people to go bother maintainers, then I think people will just ignore it. And my experience, like Node spent 5 years saying a message that unhandled promise rejections were going to break. And, you know, separate from my opinion on whether they should or not, the fact that they didn't change that message or make them break for so long means that everyone just ignored the warning. So now in Node 15, the likelihood is that a bunch of code is going to break because people ignored the warning for so long. So similarly, like, I don't know how long it'll take. NPM 7 took a while to come out. I don't know how long it'll take for NPM 8 to come out. But if it's coming out relatively soonish, and if the warning it accurately predicts that you will not be able to install anything unless this is fixed later, like, and then NPM follow through, like if all those things happen, then I think that that's a potentially reasonable compromise. You know, the other thing I suggested to Isaac that I don't think got responded to much was it would be really nice if, when installing, if you're when installing, if your package would pass on strict peer deps, stick a flag in the lock file and then use strict peer deps from then on. In other words, use it more as a stop the bleeding command, meaning once your graph is valid, it will never be invalid again without you knowing it, because it will fail the install. But if it's currently invalid the first time you run npm install on it, okay, we won't be jerks and like break you. We'll give you the big warning and show you, you know, and tell you that this will be scary later. In that case, at least, that would help new projects, and that would help projects that haven't yet run into this bug avoid running into it. Is that something that would be possible, or does that seem too magic?
That definitely sounds good to me, but I think maybe opening an RFC and like discussing it a little bit more. I mean, at the end of the day, definitely peer dependencies is definitely, I'm gonna defer to Isaac's decision. I would never step into.
But there wasn't an RFC either to stop doing the strict peer deps, and there was plenty of RFC discussion to do it initially. So like,
can I add that I also think all of these things are going to have different behaviors in the real world than we're maybe, you know, discussing here. So for example, great to print a big warning, but like 3/4 of those are going to be in CI output that nobody ever looks at. Right. So like,
yes.
And then like the number of people who just blow away their lock files and then do an install of a new thing because they think they need to do that or whatever reasoning, or maybe they do because they just don't, you know, there's something wrong with anyway. In the end of the day, these problems are just going to still crop up like quite a bit. And I don't think saying it's going to break in some unforeseen release date of NPM 8 is necessarily going to like be lighting the fire under people that you might think it would. So,
right.
I agree. Most of the users aren't going to read the error messages. I just mean that when they do see it, the scarier it is, the better. Is kind of what I was hoping for.
Yeah. So we're about almost 5 minutes over time. So I just want to be mindful of that. I apologize. There was another 2 or 3 items I think we didn't get to today, but hopefully we can follow up in the threads themselves. Specifically, I think the MPX discussion, which we'll bring up next week in the call, just about the future of that. But yeah, I appreciate everybody jumping on today and for the good discussion. And I'll follow up with the notes and posting those online just after this. Hopefully see you all next week. Ciao.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.